Perfect. Okay. So what we're going to be talking about, preparing for performance, was sort of the title that I put down there for it. And the 6-step holistic approach to warm up. And so as per what was discussed on the Facebook page, this is going to talk about both from a physical perspective and from cognitive perspective. So for those of you who haven't seen me before, my name is Mark Oxer. I am PDGA number 112340. I have a master's degree in strength and conditioning, also currently finishing a master's degree in leadership and management, have spent time as a personal trainer, and also an accredited member with the Canadian Sports Psychology Association. So that's kind of where my background lies and why I'm sharing this stuff together with you. I might make this just a tiny little bit bigger. If I need to make it smaller, I will. So as we go through here, so what I'm going to talk about, so general warm up, when we talk about general warm up, what we think about is we generally have principles of warm up. So like what's called as totality. So it's sort of the whole piece of the warm up, specificity. So exercises, or when I say exercises, we'll see it as throughout the presentation. When I speak of exercises, it doesn't just necessarily mean don't think gym, think of what you're doing on the course. And then progression, understanding that we're not just going to go like full speed ahead, and then how long that usually takes. So those are sort of general parts within a warm-up. I think that most people would probably be familiar with if we talk about the concept of a warm-up. So I'm hoping I'm going to present stuff tonight that you may have not seen or heard before. If you have, awesome. If there's people who have questions, I can see that we have some people on the Zoom call. I can't see the Facebook chat, but what I will do is I will look at those questions after, and then in the post-production, I can answer those questions as well, and then even on the chat. But if there is any questions, or if there's other people who are sort of watching on both Zoom and on the Facebook as well, and could even fast forward, pass on those questions into the chat window on Zoom, I'll be able to see those right away and I can answer those questions. So general, again, sort of warm up, traditional pieces of warm up. So what we're trying to do from a physiological perspective is we're looking to increase muscle temperature, increase body temperature, vasodilation, an improved range of motion, and then the mental preparation piece. Now, all of this is done with the intentionality of performing better within the sport, and then also not wanting to create fatigue. So we don't want to have a warm-up that is crazy tiring and then fatigues us for our performance, right? So we don't want to do like whatever, say 200 throws in our warm-up and then have our shoulder fatigued so that we're not able to execute properly within a tournament or a league round that we are about to play in, right? So we got to make sure that we're utilizing our warm-up from both a physiological perspective and a cognitive perspective in such a way that's not creating fatigue. And you can actually create mental fatigue as well. So we're making sure that we're not creating mental fatigue either, because what can happen, and for those of you who are on the call that I did last time, we talked a little bit about the flow model, and I'll touch on it again just briefly today, but we talked about how you can actually have anxiety, and some of that anxiety can come from thinking almost too much about what you're doing. And I think I might have mentioned this previously, but if you haven't read the book or heard of the book, The Inner Game of Tennis by Tim Galloway, I would highly recommend it, as it speaks a lot about the psychological piece and sort of being able to function in an automatic state, and that the idea behind what we're trying to accomplish through this warm-up is to be able to help you function into that automatic state, less thinking, more doing, so that we're not getting some of those phrases that you might have heard, like paralysis by analysis, and that kind of stuff. So we'll keep moving along here. We have, again, general pieces to warm up. So start to prepare athletes to produce movements that are going to be required for the sport. And then it should engage both parts of the brain to be used in training or competition. So we're talking about both using our left and our right brain within our competition. A warm-up needs to stimulate an athlete's entire neurological system and start to open up the neural pathways to produce sport or specific training things. So what this is going to talk about is you'll see it. I'm not sure if it was on, it hasn't come up in the slides yet, but it's going to come up. You're going to see on one of the slides that comes up that will say there is no muscular without neuromuscular. And so that's really important that we are firing neuromuscular what's going on. So our muscles physiologically can't do anything if our brain is not functioning correctly. So that's why it's really important to switch on our brain and not just be like, well, okay, I'm going to get the blood flowing. I'm going to go for a quick jog. I'm going to do this, that, the other thing, because all of those processes are actually coming from the brain. You can't have your bicep flex without your brain telling your bicep to flex. So the concept of there is no muscular without neuromuscular. So this is, again, part of the reason why we're trying to switch on the left brain and the right brain at the same time. So I want to present to you a different style of warming up, and it's called the Starts Warmup, STARTS. Each one of those letters, as visually shown here, it stands for something within the different parts, phases of a warm-up. And what that would look like is this. So the Starts Warmup is what I would want to present to you, and these are the 6 pieces of that Starts Warmup. And each of these pieces is intended to have a very specific role within the warm-up to provide a holistic approach to the athlete that is warming up. So the first part is called setting the scene. The second one is called tuning the body. The third part is achieving the zone, and that's the part that we briefly touched on in the previous presentation. And then rhythm and movement, technical rehearsal, and social engagement are those 6 pieces that we're going to go over in the next few minutes here. So the first part is setting the scene. So this could be if you are coaching an athlete, if you're an athlete yourself, both of, for all the pieces that we're going to go through, these pieces apply to that. So whether you're, like I said, doing that on your own, or if you are an athlete yourself or a coach, all of these pieces apply across that. So I'm referencing it from an athlete perspective, but coaches or educators or people who are watching this and maybe wanting to implement it with others, you guys can implement this as well with others. All right. So setting the scene. So before an athlete even starts to move, we need to set the scene for them. Or if you're going to the session yourself, if you're going to an event yourself, a tournament, a league, practice, whatever it happens to be, you need to set the scene. You need to set the environment. And part of those things, and we can talk about these in a different, maybe on a different webinar, but is to focus on an understanding of why you're there and what the expectations of that are, right? So if I'm going into a putting session, understand the why you're there and the expectations of that session. So the expectations are that I'm going to use what we talked about last time. I'm going to use random practice for this putting session. And my why is so that I can prove my putting. So now I've sort of helped clarify some of those expectations, and I'm going to be able to move forward with that, right? A lot of times I've seen this happen, and not just within the sport of disc golf, but within soccer, hockey, volleyball, a variety of different sports. Athletes are showing up to a practice, and then the coach is asking them to do things. And the athlete is a little bit confused, is saying, oh, why am I doing these, coach? Like, what's going on, right? So just having that understanding of what the purpose is, right? So if the purpose is that you're playing in a game, so I'm at this tournament, the why is to perform at the best of your ability. What are my expectations? So my expectation is that I would like to shoot par. Maybe I'd like to shoot 2 under par. I'd like to shoot a rating that is close to my average, or maybe on this course, you're feeling really good. It's a home course. You're like, I'd like to shoot 2 or 3 strokes better than what I usually shoot, and maybe see if I can bump up my rating. So having those expectations outlined from the beginning, right? And then focus on an understanding of the goals and aims of the session, coupled with a vision for what you want to achieve, right? So again, it's engaging all of these cognitive pieces. Having a why is really, really important in moving forward with the rest of whatever you're about to go forward with, right? So whether, like I said, whether that's a tournament, whether that's league play, whether that's just practice, I don't know, I'm going to back that up. Not just practice, whether that is practice, because practice is very important. It's very important to have the brain switched on to purposefully engage in what you're doing, right? And so that's part of the cognitive part to this, right? So the tuning the body, and this is probably what people are most familiar with when they think of warm up, is the tuning the body piece. So using a series of movements and exercise, we gradually start to warm up and mobilize the body. As we progress, the exercise and movements build up towards training or competition intensity, become the specific activities the athlete will use within the session. So this is probably what most people are familiar with when they think of warming up, the tuning the body piece. So let's get our blood moving. Let's get our body moving. Let's get our joints moving, our muscles moving, some of that vasodilation, all those pieces. This is that portion of the warm up. Okay. And what you want to do when you're doing this is you want to move from smaller joints to bigger joint exercises. So don't start off with huge, like, you know, all of a sudden going to go from like getting out of your car, driving to the tournament, and then like maybe going for like some sprints or something as soon as you get out of the car, right? You're going to want to move from smaller joint exercises to multi-joint exercises. And you're going to want to move from smaller ranges of motion to bigger ranges of motion. And then you're going to want to move from things that are less related to the sport of disc golf to things that are more related to the sport of disc golf. So you might want to do something like I said, just like go for a little bit of a light jog, or maybe do some like wrist movements or do some of those things. And then as we can start to move, we can start to get into shoulder circles. And after we've done maybe some shoulder circles, we get into some motions that mimic our throws. And there's different devices for that. There's a pro pull that you can use. You can use flight towel. You can just use a regular towel. You can use your disc and turn it. I have a disc here that I'll grab. So if you grab your disc here, and if you turn it sideways, so when you're practicing your pulls, I should have grabbed a different colored disc than green because it makes that funny color on the green screen. So if instead of practicing and I'm warming up and I'm doing through my motions, pulling it flat, I might want to turn it and throw it a little bit and have the disc go flat, because then it's creating some wind resistance, right? And then as I get closer and closer to being able to actually tee off, that motion is going to come faster and faster and faster. Right? So there's opportunities to do that. So that's part of that tuning the body piece. All right. So smaller joint to bigger joint. And then we're going to do smaller range of motion, moving to larger range of motion, slower movements, moving towards faster movements is the piece of that to get all the blood flowing, get the heart going, and those pieces that we're most familiar with, right? Utilizing all the different pieces of the body that we're using. The sport of disc golf uses a lot of different parts of the body, right? So it's pretty much a holistic piece. So we need to warm up our upper body. We need to warm up our lower body. When we're warming up and when we're exercising, a couple of pieces also to remember are what we do to the top, we do to the bottom. So if we warm up the top of the body, we should also be warming up the bottom of the body. If we warm up the right side of the body, we also want to warm up the left side of the body. And if we warm up the front of the body, we also want to warm up the back of the body, right? So making sure that we're dealing in all planes and all parts of the body to achieve that holistic warm up. So even if you're right-handed and you throw all your throws right-handed, it's still good to get that left arm moving, because that left arm maybe swings a little bit on a follow through or on your pull back or for balance. And it's still really good to be able to have all parts of your body warmed up and ready to go, right? So this is the part that, like I said, people are probably most familiar with. So achieving the zone. And again, I'm not going to spend a ton of time on this achieving the zone portion because we've already talked about this, but I am going to highlight it. So the drills and exercises that we use in this portion start to focus on the athletes so they become absorbed and immersed in the activity. Now, this is that piece that I was talking about with relation to the inner game of tennis and what Tim Galloway was talking about. He refers to it as athlete A and athlete B within his book that he wrote about. And how when somebody starts to think too much, their performance actually goes down. So what he's trying to, or what we're trying to do within this type of warming up is what's described in research and in the literature is that we're getting you immersed to a point where you're not thinking and you're just doing. It's a state of automaticity. So where you're just being able to purely function and doing the movements. And that's where, if you remember from those two graphs that I showed you, so there was the flow state graph and the challenge point framework graph, those two graphs that I showed you, that is that optimal sort of zone. So if there's too much anxiety, we don't achieve flow. If there's not enough challenge, we have boredom. So this is in that warm-up piece. We want to make the activity so that it's a little bit challenging for us so that we're engaging and we're excited and we can get into that flow state. If our warm-up is too slow paced, too low energy, we're not going to achieve that higher state because we're going to be in a state of boredom, right? And you may not think that you're in a state of boredom, but like I said, you haven't cognitively engaged yourself. Now, again, I'm not going to stand 100 feet away and be like, oh, I'm going to make some of these putts in my warm up, because that's going to have a couple of different negative effects. It's the challenge relative to your skill ability is maybe too far out, and you're not going to have a lot of success. So that's going to maybe stress you out a little bit. So it's going to put you into that anxiety range rather than into the flow range. The other thing is that it's going to start ingraining into your mind that you've missed. right? And you don't want that. In your warm-up, you want to ingrain success, right? So you want to be at a range where you're having success, not necessarily 100%. You don't want to stand at 10 feet and just kind of pop it in like nothing. Back it up a little bit and have some of that success so that you're ingrained in your mind positivity and success. Again, when you're doing that, go back to some of the other stuff that we talked about in the last video. Don't just stand and grab your stack of 5 putters out of your bag and be like, hey, I'm going to throw a warm up and just stand at 15 feet, throw 5 putters, and then go back to, and you're going to stand at like 18 feet and then throw a stack of 5 putters. Grab your stack of 5 putters, throw one at 10 feet, back up, throw one at 12, move over to a different side of the basket, throw one from 14 feet, go from a headwind, from a tailwind, from a crosswind, and use some of that random practice that we talked about in the last video as part of your warm-up as well. And that's going to help you get into that flow state and achieving the zone as is talked about here. Okay. So as we start to create the learning environment, it's important to understand that whether we are going to a practice, whether we're going to a tournament, whether we're going to a league round, a recreational round, all of those are opportunities for you to learn and to grow as a player. And that's why that environment is described as a learning environment, because every opportunity that we throw a disc, whether it be in a practice environment, whether that be just for fun, whether it be in a tournament, whatever it happens to be, all of those are opportunities for learn. And if we do it with intentionality, then we have the opportunity to be successful. And so it's described as a learning environment intentionally. So athletes start to move freely and become engaged in activities for their own sake. So again, with that piece of engagement and into that flow state that we're talking about. Rhythm and movement. So our rhythm and movement is, okay, so I'll copy your questions over as they come up. Perfect, thank you. So rhythm and movement, by using rhythmic exercises that engage both hemispheres of the brain, we start to switch on many areas of the brain and open up the neural pathways. And so here's that piece that I was talking about. There is no muscular without neuromuscular. And athletes can start to develop balance, rhythm training, coordination, bilateral movement, which will underpin their technical development, okay? Now, I'm trying to figure out how to process this appropriately in the disc golf world, because there is huge positive training effects that can come from utilizing music. And let me give you an example of how a real life experience that I've had with this. So I was coaching collegiate futsal. So for those who aren't familiar with futsal is the only FIFA sanctioned version of indoor soccer that's sanctioned in the world by FIFA. It's 4-a-side plus a goalkeeper, played on like a hardwood type of surface with a low bounce ball. But I was coaching this at a collegiate level. And what we did was we did all of our training sessions to music. And so what I would do is I would say, and this is something you guys could utilize, you can steal this from me. I would say to the team, all right, we're going to put on some dance music today, and I want you to play to the rhythm of the music. So we'd have a practice, and that practice session would be super, super high intense practice. And then I would say, okay, I'm going to play some classical music, and we'd spend an hour and a half practice. And I would say, I want you to play to the rhythm of the music. And that practice would be very slow, right? And that was done intentionally. And we could, in mid game, I could call it to my players and I would say, dance. And they would know that means that it's time to step up the game. So when we were in a tournament situation or a game situation, I would just say to them, dance. And they would know that means coach wants us to play a really fast paced game. Or I could say Frank, and to Frank Sinatra. So they'd be like, oh, coach wants us to slow the pace down of the game. So let's slow the pace down of the game, right? And then the other things that I would do, and this is something that's kind of interesting as well, you can actually start to play inside and outside of rhythms. Now, this is getting a little bit further than what we're talking about here, but the reason that it's interesting within the sport of disc golf is that you can include these pieces, right? So you can play a little bit faster, a little bit slower. Now with the sport and the way headphones is going and music is going and and all that kind of stuff, there's all kinds of different pieces that would facilitate maybe training with music is good versus not training with music, because you're not allowed to do it in competition. You want to practice how you play. But it doesn't mean to say that you have to completely exclude rhythm and movement. Rhythm could be how you make your putt, as an example. So I get set and I rock back and then I drive through, and that's my rhythm. And I want to keep that same rhythm as I make my other putts. So I'm going to stop, I'm going to reset, I'm going to come, and I'm going to drive through, right? So I'm maintaining that rhythm. piece as well, right? So there's a variety of different ways that rhythm can be incorporated into a disc golf training session, a game, a tournament, a recreational round. There's a variety of different ways that rhythm can be incorporated into that. And like I said, I briefly touched on some of those about playing inside the rhythm and outside of the rhythm versus playing fast versus playing slow. And even if you're just playing those things in your own mind, there's a lot of things that can do that. Again, I'll give you another really quick example here. So again, coaching collegiate athletes. So we would do things like, hey, let's do a warm-up drill. And a classic warm-up drill is in soccer is to have two lines of people and they'd run out and they turn and they come back and they run out and they turn and they come back, right? So if you ask athletes to do that, the level of engagement is fairly low. And if I would say on the way there, I want you to run and do butt kicks. On the way back, just jog. On the way there, I want you to do high knees. On the way back, I want you to just jog. And on the way there, I want you to do jumping jacks. On the way back, I want you to just jog. Athletes will do it because I've asked them to and I'm the coach. Now, if you look at the facial expressions on those athletes, it's just kind of like, they might be chitter chatting or doing things, whatever else to the other athletes in the training session. If I all of a sudden, the only variable that I change is to add loud music. If I was to say, you know what, you know how to warm up, make your runs there and back, but I turn the music up and as dance music, for example, really loud, their engagement level is significantly higher, right? And so now you guys can do this in your warm-ups into your sessions. So as part of your warm-up, you can cognitively switch yourself on, whether you're allowed to listen to music or not in tournament play or league play. You can still have some of that music playing in your own mind, like play it to yourself, right? Into your own mind. And that's going to help switch on your brain, which is going to help switch on your muscles, because again, there is no muscular without neuromuscular. All right. That was rhythm and movement. I got about 7 minutes left. I'll keep going here for you guys. Technical rehearsal. Okay. As the drills and exercises become more specific to the sport, so like what we were talking about, becoming more specific to the sport. So I'm going to start with maybe a flight towel or a pro pole in my hand. And then I'm going to move to maybe including a disc and then actually releasing that disc. So as I progress through, those warm-ups are going to look more and more like what's going to actually happen within the sport. The warm-up moves into technical rehearsal. We start working with the equipment, discs or otherwise, right? So like I said, maybe you're using a flight towel or pro pole, or there's a variety of different things you could use. If you're doing this as training for in the gym, there's obviously a variety of different pieces of equipment that you could use for warming up within a gym situation. And the athletes start to engage in participating in high quality technical skills work. So again, this is really important. How you practice is how you play. So in your warm up, practice and warm up at a high level of skill. Don't just be like kind of making lazy putts in your warm up at a tournament event, being like, oh, I'll make that when it comes tournament time. And let me give you a piece of advice here. So I've heard people say, oh, you rise to the occasion. The fact is that people do not rise to the occasion. Research is very clear on this, that people do not actually rise to the occasion. This is why really high functioning organizations like military, police, fire, paramedic, and again, I give an example of, I have people in my life who I'm very close to. Their organizations that they're working for within those medical service environments that I've just listed off, they live by the mantra that you do not rise to the occasion, but you sink to your level of training. And this is why it's really important to do these things in your warm-ups as well, because you're not going to all of a sudden go from missing a bunch of putts in a warm-up to sinking them in a tournament play. You need to cognitively be switched on, physiologically be switched on to do that in your warm-ups as well. All right. So that high level of technical ability. Okay. And so again, I'm going to reiterate that you do not rise to the occasion, you sink to your level of training. Your foundation, when everything starts to go sideways, when Derek, who just joined us, hey, Derek, it's good to see you, buddy. When Derek is standing there with his camera videotaping you and you've got to make a pressure putt on the 18th hole, you're not all of a sudden going to rise to the occasion and make that putt. The research is very clear on that. So what it tells us is create those high pressure situations in your mind, and do it in warm up, do it in practice. And when it comes to having to execute them in an actual high performance, high stress situation, you have a more higher chance or a higher likelihood of being successful in that situation. Okay. So I got a couple minutes left here. I'm going to get to the last S. So social engagement. Now, because we participate in a social sport, I know that it's an individualistic sport and that we are all playing for our own individual score, but we are engaged with other people either on the card or in the tournament, or there's a whole bunch of different ways that disc golf is socially engaging. So it's really important to engage in two facets within that social engagement. So you want to engage in a group piece. So towards the end of the work, move into group exercises, start to broaden your focus. This is important because when you are participating in the sport, so you might be practicing on a basket, maybe at the beginning of your time, you go off to the side and you're warming up by yourself. As it gets closer and closer to your actual tee off time, go over to the basket where there's other people warming up and start to engage in that, because when you're in play, there's going to be sounds of chains. There's people might be moving around. All of those pieces are going to be occurring while you're in a game situation or a tournament situation, a league situation. All of those are going to be occurring, but you don't start there. Don't start in a really high sort of social place. Move from sort of being a little bit more siloed or solo into that group environment. And then you can start having conversations with people. You can start engaging a little bit more socially once you've gone through these other pieces of the warm up. And then that second piece is start to tune into their environment, their spaces around them and other people so that they can start interacting and communicating. So how these two pieces tie together. Okay. So you might start interacting in a smaller group setting with the people that are specifically on your card, or you might start interacting with, if you have a coach, you might interact with a coach. You might have to interact with the tournament director, but being able to interact with those, interacting with your environment. What are the baskets that I'm going to be playing on? There's a variety of ways that you're going to sort of be engaging that from a social perspective, because that is a part of our sport. And it's really important that athletes engage in that in an intentional way in both practice and in their warm-up. Because again, if you don't engage in it in the warm-up, if you're just sort of off to the side doing your own thing, and then all of a sudden the tee off, it's called, okay, you're up on the box, and you get up there and somebody starts asking you a bunch of questions like, hey, nice to meet you. Where are you from? What do you do for work? Oh, what disc is that? Blah, blah. And you're not mentally prepared for those pieces. It can really rattle somebody. So get prepared for those pieces prior to and intentionally include them as part of your warm-up. Okay. So those are I'm going to go back to that first slide so people can take a look at it here. Those are those 6 elements of the Starts Warmup that I want to share with you guys today. And I thank you for taking the time to listen to me to do that.